Okay, well, let's go ahead and get started. Thank you, everyone, for joining today's community webcast on upgrading your Identity Suite version, some key considerations. Today we have Enrique and Alan from our services team who are going to be walking us through all this important information. So we will be recording this session as well, so you will be able to view the recording up on the community site and a copy of the presentation. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Enrique. So Enrique, it's all yours.
Thanks, Chris. By way of introduction, Alan Baugher and myself are senior principal architects in the services organization, primarily focused on security products with a lot of integration with other products in the CA portfolio. That said, conversations have been raised frequently over the last year or so on upgrading from end-of-service versions of Identity Suite and Identity Suite components to the current versions of the Identity Suite products. Essentially, if you're familiar with Identity Suite at all, you know that we essentially have a identity portal as the web UI now fronting both Identity Manager and Identity Governance, and there are a number of capabilities built into the product today that is really now being viewed as a single pane of glass for accessing the resources. That said, there's a number of questions that we have typically discussed with customers when we engage them in discussions on maintenance program as to why they are at the version they are and why they're concerned now with having to upgrade. So we'll cover things like making the upgrade decision, choosing an upgrade approach, upgrading specific objects in the Identity Suite databases and directories, and the data migration tasks you'd have to go through. And talking with Alan about this presentation and future presentations, we're probably going to get into a series of webcasts related to the upgrade process, why you make the decision, what you're going to take with you from the initial target, the initial cutover phase, and what additional releases you're going to have for the updated capabilities when you move to the new releases of the software. So let's talk about making the upgrade decision. Why essentially would you want to move to a new release of Identity Suite, which includes Identity Manager and Identity Governance? A lot of you have essentially been recipients of emails or have looked at the support site and noticed that there was an end-of-service announcement for the current platform you're working with based on what the previous platforms were. So I'm not sure how well you can read the pictures that are here. Essentially, the PDF you would receive of this will allow you to magnify that. But the CI Identity Suite product page, when you go to it, will have an end-of-service announcement for the previous releases. The last one was posted out there was for the 12.6x versions, and it tells you that 2-3 years down the road, they are going to be taken out of support, essentially, and you would at some point need to move into the new platform to be able to just have a working environment working, and or to be able to take advantage of the new capabilities of the software. So, for instance, when we talk about Identity Suite 14.0, there have been a lot of improvements made in the capability of using packaged work use cases, essentially the Deployment Express marketplace, or being able to deploy with different deployment platforms. So there's various reasons you'd want to move off of an older platform to a newer platform. Specifically, we've just gone through some migrations which involve customers coming from versions of Identity Manager that were probably 5 years past their EOS date. And that did involve migrating the current components, essentially your provisioning directory components, as well as your identity policies, Policy Express policies, all of those things. And it was possible to accomplish all of that using the migration tools that allow you to export and import all of those configurations from one platform to another, essentially taking an approach that had a parallel migration process. So another reason then for doing the upgrade essentially is that your supported platforms are going to change. Specifically, vendors have said that OS systems, SQL databases are going to go out of support, and there's an initiative in place that would require you to upgrade that. And we'll talk about that when we get into what we look at from the requirements for looking at the operating system database and the application server. So the choices to make the upgrade essentially are driven from two things. One is the supportability of the product versions you're using today, And the other one really is the underlying platform that's being used by your own operations team for operating systems, databases, and application servers. So into service announcements. I talked about the fact that the individual components that make up Identity Suite, the 12x versions of all of the software are also what was previously known as Sigma 1.6. All of those have gone into, have published into service times. And the reasons for moving to Identity Suite version 14.0, now soon to be 14.1, those timelines are really already published, and there should already be a project plan in place, or a migration plan in place that allows you to move forward to the newer versions to make sure that you're currently using support software when you get further down the road and using the Identity Suite components. Specifically, changes in Identity Governance and Identity Manager and the way they're packaged with Identity Portal has made it a more usable platform for user-friendly experience for end users to work with access requests and with self-service functions. But essentially, there's also some significant performance improvements in your underlying application infrastructure that dictate you moving to that new platform just to take advantage of that. So in the service announcements is something you really want to be aware of when you want to make sure that you have a maintenance plan in place to be able to stay current, not only with major releases but also with service packs or with cumulative patches. When we look at IT operations upgrades initiatives, these are the things that would ask you to move based on the fact that the infrastructure is changing from where the applications are running. One customer we were discussing a migration project with, or an upgrade project with, was still using a version of the software that you could deploy on Windows 2003 server. That was fairly dated, and they had finally been mandated by their operations team to move up into a newer platform, which currently for them would be Windows 2012. 2016 is on the horizon and is being adopted by many customers today. But 2012 seems to be the platform version from a Windows perspective that many people are using. The Unix and Linux variants, those are changing frequently, and it all depends on what is the current strategy that an enterprise would have in place to allow you to stay closer to the current version of Unix or Linux that is certified, not necessarily supported, but certified for use inside the organization as a secure platform to host applications. On the database platform, significant changes in the SQL Server environment. Microsoft has made many changes since 2008 was available, which is probably 5 to 8 years ago. And most customers today are running on 2012, and some are looking to get to a newer platform than that. I believe 2014 is what some customers are working with today on a development or a pre-production platform. But most customers are requiring upgrades to a new database platform, and from the supportability perspective, if you look at the platform support matrix for Identity Suite and the included products, if you go to the newer releases of the database platform, you also have to update the application itself. Oracle really has 11 and 12 out there. Not too many people that I'm aware of have already upgraded to 12, but certainly 11G is a platform of choice that people are still working with for Oracle. So you may be a little bit better off from that perspective from having to move just because of the database requirement. But the configurations for Oracle is supported by the database team in a given operation is all specific to what you can run on that server. Application servers then would be another reason for the supported platform for that app server changing, requiring you to upgrade the Identity Suite components. Wildfly has become the more prevalent platform for JBoss users today, accepted as a secure environment, not necessarily having to run with a Red Hat 6 enterprise application server that you would need from a security perspective, but essentially most products today are being distributed on the Wildfly platforms. The CA components work on 8.2. There are other versions of Wildfly with higher levels than that. I'm not sure we've actually certified all of our software or anything beyond 8.2 at this point. WebLogic works for all the product components except for Identity Governance, WebSphere except for Identity Portal. So there are different requirements depending on what you're running in your current deployment into what you would need to be able to migrate to. And you also have to look at the fact that you're running with software that essentially is put together as an integrated suite. And so you need to make sure that you stay in the right compatibility levels for the application servers that are running. But most companies that are using WebLogic or WebSphere really would not be looking at Wildfly or JBoss in a production environment. It seems to be platform specific when you're working with production versus what you may be doing in a sandbox or dev environment. But again, operations upgrade initiatives, what your underlying infrastructure requirements are, would also be a requirement for you to move from one version of Identity Suite to the latest version of Identity Suite for compatibility purposes. So let's then talk about choosing an upgrade approach. Which is the direction you're going to take for moving to an upgraded version of your current platform up into the 14.0 environment? Very quickly here, what I highlighted was the upgrade considerations for Identity Suite. The Identity Portal, the Web UI component of Identity Suite. This essentially would tell you where you could come from and whether you can do an upgrade in place or whether you can do a migration. Now, from the perspective of reducing risk when you're doing an upgrade, the reality of being able to upgrade a production environment of Identity Manager with a multi-node, multi-database deployment is fairly high. You're trying to do an upgrade in place. You essentially have to have a maintenance view of your production deployment to be able to update those components, a new database, a new setup of application servers running the new instance of the application itself, the Identity Suite components, and migrate the objects, the policies, as well as the directory objects over into a new environment. What you don't want to do is disrupt your identity management availability. Governance and identity management functionality seems to be becoming more of a tier 1 platform in most corporations. Most enterprises say that it has to have 5 nines availability. You can publish maintenance windows, but the reality is they like to have this available for users' purposes 7 by 24. The reason is most people today are using it for self-service functionality, profile updates, password resets, password changes on managed endpoints such as mainframe environments, where password complexity might not map to what you would have in a Windows environment, so you have to be able to change those passwords at any given time. So the option of choosing what approach you want depends on what capabilities you have to be able to have runtime or uptime functionality for your users while you're doing the upgrade. If you have the leisure of being able to take your system down for a couple of days to be able to complete all the upgrades and do the functional testing and regression and acceptance testings from the users, you'd be able to do that with an upgrade in place strategy, assuming that you're coming from a version that you actually can upgrade in place. You have to be fairly close to 14.0 release, let's say 12.6 and higher, to be able to do that upgrade in place and minimize the risk of having any problems with the integrated components. But typically, the migration path is the safer way to go to reduce the risk of getting that upgrade to run effortlessly and seamlessly. You want to be able to make sure that when you do the upgrade, all the configured policies you have in place work well. So, what are the components you have to upgrade of all of the from the Identity Suite side? So there's 3 essentially integrated products that you're working with. Identity Manager has its own set of components that need to be upgraded, starting with the directories that are based as part of the provisioning server components. The meta directory information that's stored in the provisioning directory about all the managed endpoints that you're connecting to today, that information needs to move from the previous release up into the current release schema. Between the 12.6 and 14.0 versions, there have been few changes in the schema so that the upgrade could essentially happen in place. Coming from 12.0 all the way up to 14.0, you still can accomplish that, but you have to do essentially an import of the previous provisioning directory components into the deployed 14.0 functionality. 14.0 schema, and that will take care of the resolving most of the problem of the object differences in those 2 schema configurations. Main difference essentially would be any sensitive components such as passwords, making sure that you have the same encryption library capabilities between the previous release and the 14.0 release that you're upgrading to. There have been changes in the database schemas, specifically in the area of task persistence and the audit tables. And so you want to make sure that when you're bringing data forward, it depends on the requirements you have to have your task persistence data available in the new version versus keeping it available through a view-only version of the previous application. Data from the audit tables could essentially be migrated forward for real-time access, online access. All of the other functionality built in, all of the other data stored in the object store, as well as the WorkPoint designer tables, the WorkPoint tables, those essentially can be migrated to the newer platform using the tools in place. The managed endpoints themselves, for the most part, they're going to be consistent. So your legacy connectors are still your legacy connectors. The IAM connector server, which runs the CCS, the C++ connector server, still connects to Active Directory, Exchange, a number of the legacy components on the mainframe specifically, using the same capabilities that were in place before. There are version 2 of a lot of the components for working with the CA-LDAP server on the mainframe from the connectors, and they're essentially JCS level connectors. So, you know, that essentially is one change you could make from the way you're connecting to those platforms. The application server you're running on is really going to be a platform change that you have to make depending on if you're moving from an older release of JBoss to a new release of JBoss or WebLogic or WebSphere. So that's going to require another implementation, installation onto that platform, and making sure that all of the connectivity works to the newly hosted application server. Then, of course, you're looking at the configurations, account templates, provisioning roles, identity policies, policy express policies, forms handlers, and identity portal. The things that actually interact with Identity Manager tasks, so those are the things that you're going to have to look at moving from the older platform to the newer platform. And there's a couple of slides later on that Alan will talk on that talk about the tools and scripts that are available to accomplish that. And there's also improvements coming out with the 14X releases. When we start looking at identity governance, you have a similar type of information you have to port forward for the connectivity from identity governance into its resource sources. Specifically, you need to make sure that you can connect to the directories you were working with before. Of course, there's the Identity Manager integration. You also may have direct connection through the ETL tools for identity governance. Databases, of course, need to be migrated from the older platform to the newer platform. You do have the ability to use the dynamic connectors through the IAM-CS, the connector server, and you connecting directly to endpoints for read-only purposes. But of course, all of the updates need to be done through the Identity Manager integration. Change in application server. That's going to be different depending on whether you're going to stay with Wildfly or go to, hope I don't say this incorrectly, WebLogic. Then you need to make sure that that version is running and correctly. And of course, you have the configurations you want to bring across. What were your campaign definitions? What was the previous information from the audit card specifics you want to be able to migrate up into the newer platforms? So identity governance has a similar set of objects that need to be moved from the lower level environments, the lower previous version environments, up into the current 14.x environment. Lastly, of course, we're talking about Identity Portal. Identity Portal has its own forms database, a database to have its access catalog, entitlements written into, as well as the form definitions, modules, tasks, connectivity to Identity Governance and Identity Manager. All that information needs to be ported up into the Identity Portal databases. Connectors need to be retested. And the application server needs to be upgraded and reviewed from the connectivity perspective. All the configurations in the case of forms handler logic, any type of the filtering information that is included in the forms, all that needs to be brought forward into the new Identity Portal environment. Tools exist, specifically to be able to export the configurations from the previous version and import them into the newer version and test them. validate them, and then essentially you have to be able to do an entire UAT across the whole identity suite deployment. So these are the requirements to be able to move information from the previous version up into the updated parallel environment, and then be able to put that online and sunset your older application platforms. So, data migration task. There are tools in place that allow you to export and import data coming from either for the directories that are part of the Identity Suite deployment. The corporate user store, essentially now called the IAM user store, is the user data. If you're talking about a non-CA directory implementation, of course, you're working with an external directory from the perspective of the out-of-the-box identity environment provided with Identity Suite. So those are considerations you have to think about when you're going to connect to the components that are part of Identity Suite 14.0, the IAM user store itself, and whether you're going to be using the out-of-the-box identity environment schema or working with the schema you had in place when you were moving from a previous version to the newest version, to the newer version. That being said, Identity Store or Corporate User Store schemas are supported in the newer release. It's just your own version of the Identity Store. Provisioning directory, all that information is related to managed endpoint connectivity, account templates, export correlate definitions. That information gets ported over when you export the data from the previous directory and update it with the installer for the provisioning directory from the IDS 14.0 environment. The IME, or the Identity Management Environment Configuration, we know that we can do an export-import of that information from a lower-level environment to a higher-level environment. That's typically the path that was taken for the purposes of doing a migration from non-production to production environments. And other things such as custom Java classes, the backgrounds, colors, all of the skinning information that's in the CSS files, that essentially is something that has to be moved into newer environments. So those are considerations for the objects you have to move from the Identity Manager perspective. In moving data from the Identity Portal, you basically export-import configurations in a JSON format, and you have to bring across the custom changes, form handlers, and skins, the same type of a thing. And there's some notes on migration requirements you have for moving the corporate user store, the provisioning store, the IME or the portal components that Alan added. And there are already discussions on the CA Community Security site related to a number of the topics that we cover here. So we're pointing to what needs to be considered for doing the data migration task and putting the new environment in place. The wrap-up module here, and I'll ask Alan to chime in whenever he's ready to talk about this. A lot of this information Alan has actually published already for information of using a DevOps process for doing a migration from a lower release to a newer release. There are migration scripts provided with the current products and also shared out in the community site. There's a test strategy and an automation strategy for that testing that can be implemented using the tools available that CA has today. Alan, can you go ahead and comment on this?
Certainly. So, thank you, Enrique. As Enrique says, we do have quite a bit out there on the community site, some under my ID as well as others that have commented, as well as from customers as well. Some of the areas here that we have on the wrap-up area for the migration and test strategy and automation, we've been validating those continually with service projects and just basically picking the best processes out there that seem to work very well. And we've got some of these highlighted as just the value statements of each one of some of the areas here. So all the way from a discovery process to the use of DevOps or even TDM approaches, we've got there listed. So if I walk through them just to get clarified, for like the discovery process, and it really fits really well into how do we leverage in a project team the business analysts that'll be involved, not just the technical team that'll be deployment of the solution stack itself, but how do we leverage the business value you'll get out of the solutions. And the discovery process is just to clarify that as a parallel stream from a project viewpoint. And there's always the question, when you've had a solution in place for many years, is do we do keep the same business process going forward? And it's an opportunity to go through our review session, whether to keep, replace, or retire older business value content, because the businesses have changed. Every business changes within a 3-year life cycle. So there's always that question of what can change. So the discovery process walks through that, and you can move into what we call like a factory model. How do you leverage a business team to streamline this through whether it's a top-down approach, where you're basically doing interviews or collecting information from business teams out there with the business units, and then there's always the bottom-up. How do you get to grab the raw data out there and to start pulling stuff and to correct it? And by merging those two together, you get a better value statement of what you want the solution to actually perform. And then I got a list of the pros and cons there as well that goes through that. And and then the business team can definitely be, we try to leverage as much as 50% or more of the customer's own staff to do that, because that way the knowledge transfer is there. It's not lost. It's not sent off with the vendor when the vendor moves on. So this is the value of those two areas. The concept of a data warehouse into this is there's always a challenge from an audit standpoint when you're going through the process here. There's applications that have not been connected to, or they're standalone, or there's air gap requirements. And there may be existing a data warehouse out there that starts collecting this from a governance viewpoint. If not, this is where we leverage just another parallel stream, is to start collecting this data where you're not even relying on the CA solution stack yet. You're not even relying on the project team to be in place yet. This is something that would be able to collect this raw data, start manipulating and normalizing for use as well. So that one has a direct value, is it's going to tie right into a phase 1, phase 2, whatever part of the project that's released out there. So some of these have worked very well for the business value, and then to get a more quicker return of an upgrade or deployment of a solution. The concept of DevOps, that term has been, you've probably seen it quite a bit, the combination of the best development and how to integrate that with operations teams. And that can be broken out into 2 areas that we found of value. One is not only the deployment. If we can avoid the mini cooks in the kitchen when we're starting to do deployments or doing upgrades of the binary components of a solution, we can avoid sometimes the misconfigurations that may occur, or if we want to get into where we can horizontally scale a solution out rapidly, whether it's on-prem or in the cloud, is how can we automate this through any DevOps tools, or even basic through command line interface processes, is how do we can streamline that. So that's one area, and I've got an example up there showing that process, and we've leveraged at other sites as well. The hyperlink up there, but talking about DevOps, how you can do validation is not only that, but also deployment and post-configuration, integration between components. The other area of DevOps that comes in real value is moving away from a project team, but moving more into operations, is how do we move data or the business objects that we've validated in a lower environment to the next environment, to the QA, to the prod. So this is something that, Facebook, Google, they do very well, and it's something we try to emulate with the security stack here as well, is to identify that business logic, exercise it through use case validation, and as soon as it passes that, then to push it back out, and then into if there's an existing code tree, push it out there, and then push it right back into the next environment. And that leverages the ability of the APIs we have, as well as the command line interfaces process. And larger organizations we've worked with that have already invested in the DevOps, this is where it makes sense to have a part of a project team dedicated to that, to streamline that entire process. The one thing with DevOps is that first time you touch the system and you're doing this, just think of that effort as just a wash, basically, whether you're doing it by hand. But the gain for any other environment is considerable. You've reduced it from, a week, 2 weeks of effort down to less than 2 minutes. That's a huge gain there. The other approach that we have, you may have heard of it, called TDM, Test Data Management, is how do we know our use case testing in the dev or in the QA is correct. And we've all found out that when you roll out into production, QA never looks like prod. And, that makes sense because you never can really scale out QA completely the way prod is. And sometimes the data set, not just the service, but the data sets may not be quite there. And so this is a means to how do we take non-privacy information and push it to a lower environment so we can get better use case testing to make sure that we have no showstoppers, to make sure we have no high issues. We only want to have, the low and the mediums to deal with when we do rollouts or have productions, just from a sanity as well. And some of those processes exist at customers and others. It's just an introduction to that. How do we do it as a one-time event, or maybe do it as a scheduled, biannual event whenever we need it from a project team or during a project. The other area here we've pushed for and we've gotten acceptance on is the use of how do we abstract the even deployment of our solutions, and this is where we've CA's invested in the appliance method for the Identity Suite, and we do have that out there for customers to leverage. We still go through a sanity check, the validation, to see whether it meets the customer's needs. It fits very well into certain customers that have restricted use cases, or if they're able to leverage they're really invested into the VMware architecture, and we're actually getting out there into the cloud environment with that appliance well. But it basically moves the whole supporting and responsibility of the solution stack itself, as well as the OS, the J2E tier, the Java, JDK components, all back into the CA's hands and managing the security of that component. And there's customers that do like that may not have as large of a shop as from their staff just to manage the technical. They just want to really focus on the business value. So that's another option we have available. From a part of the upgrade, there may be multiple phases for deployment. If there's, as Enrique mentioned, we do have the identity governance, we have the identity portal, identity management. Some customers may have just one component. They're only really focused on one area, and that reduces the complexity somewhat when we're talking about an integration, because we are talking about enterprise solutions that do touch many different endpoints out there. And you can think we've had customers with thousands of databases, thousands of cloud applications, as well as multiple Active Directory systems and Unix servers out there. And so it gets to challenging is we have to make sure we have QA time available for that that fits the customer's base. So this is where we get into the concept of business release cycles, just get into a standardized process of identifying what the business logic is. After all the solutions have been upgraded and deployed, is how do we move this business logic from a lower environment up to the next release, and how do we get it into a pre-release cycle into the production environment, so it's not open to the business or to the cloud community, but open to the customer's own staff to go through another sanity check, another validation check, using whatever QA tools that are in play. And that way, it avoids those showstopper issues. We're aware of them. So basically, the whole thing is, as I got through in the bottom of the slide, there's just that saying, fail early, fail fast, fail often. As much as you can, automate all the use case testing. And that includes not only use case testing as you would, a user would execute all the APIs, but all the way down to the endpoints. Did the data change? Did the password change? Just validation all the way through the cycle. Because this is the method that's going to tell us if there's anything that's not set correctly in the process itself. And the last part that ties into this is that automated use case testing. Whether it's using HP Load Runner or other tools, we found this to be highly valuable, and CA has actually invested in this as well as with BlazeMeter. I've leveraged out the open source JMeter for this for customers as well, and this becomes a very valuable tool. It is the canary in the coal mine approach. So if the use case fails, something downstream is not set correctly. And by leveraging this process for the project managers, for the consultants, architects, for the customers can run from their own desktop to automate the testing, to kick off for each test use case, this will reduce the FUD, the fear, uncertainty, doubt. Is the solution working as designed? Is it giving me a process? And it's no longer thinking about testing one at a time, because you can imagine a poor QA resource going through a spreadsheet or a document trying to test each use case. That may take 10 minutes for each use case, and if there's hundreds of use cases, 200 use cases, it could take him a team of more than a week just to go through this. And this is when we start thinking about an upgrade, is how do we streamline that process? And this is one area that brings back value not only during the project rollout of an upgrade, but also during just continuous operations validation. And the way I think of it, everything that's a use case, just every task that you would expose to a user or API would be to just identify the initial conditions for it and automate that all the way through the UI down to the various endpoints out there. It doesn't matter whether it's mainframe, AD, Unix, or even off to the cloud system here. So these are some of the areas that we found very valuable for projects as well as upgrades, is to expose all these different areas and just to do knowledge transfer as well as training on these aspects as well.
Thanks, Alan. I appreciate that. I see that we have one question in the Q&A window. One of them, the first question that Bill Ton posted, the first of the two-part question is related to the task systems database model. And the question there, and I think you've had experience with this also, is does that get updated automatically when you're when you're running the installer in upgrade mode? Essentially, when you're coming from lower level releases, anything before 12.6.4 is what I've experienced, the task persistence database schema changed significantly in the amount of information and the data that was stored in there. And there is a migration tool available in the samples directory that allows you to accommodate that coming from something prior to 12.6.4 going up into even 14.0. I haven't noticed any significant differences in the 14.0 schema that would prevent you from doing that, but Alan, you have a comment on that?
Yeah, what's nice is all the SQL commands for Oracle or Microsoft are exposed under the samples, and you can actually view the delta between whatever version you're on and the latest releases. You can see it. The big extras that's been added is quite a bit from the test persistence is the ability of new store procedures that have been added to the test persistence. And the value there is the test persistence we know is the one that gets hit often, and we want to keep it at a low row count. And anything that's older than 2 to 3 to 4 weeks, we want to have that moved over to the archive. And the value, of course, is you can allow archive to grow to gigabytes, grow to terabytes, but the primary test persistence, we want to keep that trim so we can have a fast response in the UI. And so that's some of the value that's there. So that actually happens is not during the upgrade, but when first time you start IAM, you will see if you're watching the logs, it'll go through a sanity check of every single database to see if it needs to update that database. And so every time IAM starts, it does a quick little check to make sure the databases are correct as well. So you can imagine the value of that is if there was a disaster recovery scenario where your database is copied off and you have to bring it back, and if it was an older version, it would update it as well. So that it would have the ability of the new store procedures available.
Thanks, Alan. And I think the second part is, why is the IAM version listed in the Management Console still the old version? So I've noticed that quite a bit. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, that one's just a database entry. If you were to create a brand new IME, you would see it pick up the brand new version. So when you do an upgrade, it's just carrying across it doesn't update that database entry for the other IME that you carried forward. It's just going to, if you create a brand new IME, you'll see the date. So don't go off of that version. That's just a placeholder to say when was that IME created. So it also gives you, what it is, that gives you a placeholder to understand is there any new, if you were to expose some new task, has those tasks been updated that you may want to add? If there's new brand new endpoints that you bring in that you have not exposed in the prior IME, it would just give you an indicator, or whoever's doing the install, to say, let's go out there to the advanced settings and re-add some brand new endpoint task.
Yeah, one of the things I was going to comment on, if you look at the zip file that's created when you do an IME export, there are 3 XML files. The first XML file, which isn't labeled as settings or roles, essentially has the initial version that was used when that IME was created, and that's why it gets propagated from a lower level environment to a newer and even updated environment. The settings themselves, if you import those, you're basically just going to update in place what is compatible between previous releases, and you have the ability to go in and tweak additional settings that are new to the current release. And your roles, essentially your roles and tasks, your screen definitions, policy express policies, all of those components get imported into the new IME as unique objects in the Identity Manager object store. And if there are new capabilities in PX functionality, REST calls, things like this, you would have to include them into the PX policies that were imported in. All of that information will need to be updated as required based on the capabilities you're trying to put in place.
Yep. And just to add on, a nice little training exercise for yourselves is to show that IAM has this ability for the databases to do creation upon when it restarts. Is that once you get the login IDs available in the database, you could drop the entire databases and just recreate the login IDs with blank information. And when you start IAM, you'll see it actually create all the tables itself. So it's a good way for if you have a test environment, a dev environment, or even a lab on your own workstation. If you're running this through your own system, it's a good way to basically get a more comfortable feeling about what you can do with any solution to push it to its limitations to see how to support it completely.
Do you see the comment there from Itamar on the importance of post-upgrade to import the roles and tasks in the management console?
Yep. So the post-upgrade,
yeah,
that updates the IME. So if you do carry over the IME that has that old entry, there are, when you go through the roles and task management console, there is a extra XML file that's imported that you'll need to click on and update those. Otherwise, you won't get the newer functionality.
Correct. So Active Directory features, Link, Office 365, those type of capabilities, you want to make sure you bring them in place. There is another question from Mike Wally that I don't quite know how to answer that one. Federated SSO, SAML 2.0 with solution other than CSSO. If yes, where can you find how-to documentation? Good point. And we're talking about the single sign-on into Identity Manager as an application outside of using SiteMinder for that session assurance, right? For that session identity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we've had customers that.
Go ahead.
Yeah, like I said, we have customers that do that without us, so they use what we call the light integration, just using the session cookie to authenticate into the IAM solution. I'm not quite sure on that one. I'd have to look at that one.
Yeah, Mike, we'll take that one offline and follow up with you through the community site. So I'm not sure how to go forward on the address with on the question about Docker containers and support in Release 14. I think we would need to defer that into development and let the dev team answer on the community side now. What do you think?
The Docker, yeah, I know that's on the roadmap. I'll have to push back on the question back to the product team to if there's a release date or when it's out there. Yeah, I think we'll just push that one back out there to see where they can actually come back with. Okay.
Okay, Abhijit, we'll take that offline.
So, hey guys, this is Dave Culberson. I'll chime in just a little bit on that and just state that in the 14.1 release timeframe, which is due up midsummer, specifically mid-July, we're about 40-ish days away or so from GA release on that. We're going to be supporting AWS as an AMI and eventually have support for the Amazon store as well. Beyond that is Azure support, and then we'll be looking at containerization via Docker out beyond that, as well as some OpenStack stuff as well. So we're taking a very progressive approach to virtualization, but also a very systemic and methodical approach to virtualization as well. So it's out there. It is something we're considering in the backlog, but it has not been prioritized at this point as something we're going to deliver to market.
Thanks, Dave. As I said, Alan and I will probably be looking at outlining some additional sessions related to upgrades and migration strategies, especially expanding on the number of the topics that are listed in the table that is on the wrap-up slide. Those will be follow-up sessions more from a process change, management consulting view, and as we get any additional tools published as part of the products or through the community site, we'll try to highlight those on the follow-up webcast. I don't see any additional questions in the Q&A, Chris. We can also always follow up by looking. Okay.
Enrique, there is one from Mike that just came in. Did you see that one?
Yes, yeah, I saw that. So, okay.
Current release of governance miner failed the pen test.
All right, let's submit pen test, right?
Default
passwords are JBoss provided by CA. So, I mean, realistically, there's a stated direction in the product guides that, default passwords are just that and should be modified post-deployment. Not sure about the like a black box questions we're talking about here. I know that the way that the JBoss is packaged in the virtual appliance, the Wildfly instance, you don't really have access to the configuration consoles at all. It's already being done through the deployment dashboard. Beyond that, essentially JBoss is a infrastructure environment component that needs to be in place to deploy identity suite components on as running applications. Not sure really how to handle the question of default passwords will not really change, right?
Well, there's always the admin password that comes with JBoss out of the box that's available that could be changed to a different ID or to a different password that's stored stored as a file under JBoss. So that's a possibility right there, is not to accept that default password there, but actually just change the ID and the password so it's not just admin in lowercase, and I forget what the default password is but it's stored in the file, and there's actually a command line process provided by the JBoss binaries to actually change and add IDs.
Yeah, the add user CLI bat.
Yep, exactly.
So, Mike, one follow-up question you have there is, where's the best place to obtain documentation for the Identity Suite components, which is really on the docops.ca.com site. It logs you into what is formerly known as the CA Wiki. You search for Identity Suite, look for release 14.0, and that will get you that information in an electronic form. You can, if you're logged in as a CA support user, be able to export that into either EPUB or into PDF form. That's typically the places you would start to look for documentation.
I think I just saw one additional question from Mike on 14.1 availability. Yes, we're still targeting July, mid to late July timeframe. Target date is tentatively 7/19 for GA.
Thanks for that specificity, Dave.
Yep. I'll make one other comment too on the default passwords thing, and just again, always a huge proponent of defense in depth type approaches to security. So default passwords, obviously when we install and lay down software, there's going to be a default password to establish initial connectivity. Best practices really around that kind of stuff says, you really need to be implementing, account to account, service account, privileged account management type approach, where, the password gets checked out of a vault service on each startup cycle and is really not known to the application, or to any human user, so that you avoid, you know, a known password scenario or an encrypted on-disk password scenario. I know that JBoss and many other application servers support our solution, CA-PAM, as well as other third-party solutions like CyberArk and some of the other players in that market segment. So, you know, definitely, you know, I would say across the board, regardless of the middleware infrastructure component, you know, some sort of service account-to-account password vaulting, or application-to-application password vaulting, rather, is a best practice and standard around that. And you should never promote a production environment that has static passwords, default or otherwise, into a especially consumer-facing environment, but even in a you know, internal employee you know, B2E type environment either.
Okay, so let me move it on to the wrap-up slide. Alan and myself, we're both on the community. You should be able to reach us there. On the screen, you'll see our email information. Be able to reach out specific questions to us from the topics we covered here, or anything else that comes into your mind. But really, CA Communities would be the best method for running that communication. If we receive an email that we think something should be shared, we'll definitely put it on the community site for public consumption, and also for being able to share the information out with the entire Identity Suite or Identity Manager community.
Yep. And just a quick item, since we do have the virtual appliance available, and you may be thinking about an upgrade in the future, maybe months out, maybe, you know, a year out or something, what I'd recommend for not so much from the technical team, but also from the business team, if they want to see the new value of the use case, Application Express, some of the functionality, there's a built-in demo, complete business view of the functionality in the appliance, and it can run right off your workstation, whether it's VMware Workstation or VMware Player, as well as you can run it off an ESX server. And as the 14.1, when it gets released, you could set up a sample lab out there in the AWS cloud as well. So it's something that, you know, not waiting on until you actually have it deployed to view it, but take opportunity right now to grab a copy of it.
That's a really great point, Alan, yeah, and very important point, right? Like the ability to do an ad hoc lab or investigation of how applicable this is going to be to your environment is literally at your fingertips and moments away from a deployment to explore and inspect.
Absolutely.
Okay, we're about 5 minutes to the top of the hour. Do we have any last quick questions in the Q&A? Anything anyone wants to ask? Okay, well, I don't see anything coming in, so at this point, I'd like to thank everybody for participating. Alan, Enrique, Dave, any last comments, words?
Not for me.
I was going to say, I think the only thing that I would add, folks, is we always appreciate your participation in the community site. If you're aware of other users in the ecosystem that aren't participating in communities, please let them know how to participate. And we're always all eyes on, you know, the activity there. So, you know, the folks, Alan and Enrique, who are participating today, thank you guys very much for your insights. They're very active in the communities, as well as myself in product management. So always happy to take information that's produced there, as well as ideation that's produced there, and continue to drive improvement in the product.
Excellent. Well, thank you guys for presenting today. Thank you, Alan, Enrique, Dave, Itamar, for chiming in. And thank you, everyone who came and participated. We will be posting the recording up on the site as well as the presentation. So, again, thank you, everyone, and please be on the lookout for future sessions.
right, Chris, thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks, Chris. Take care.